Drink beer, it's good for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue, and I'm gonna drink till the day that I die.
Hello and welcome to the video. This is part 3 of my Grainfather hints and tips collection. Be sure to check out the other 2 parts if you haven't already. Let's kick off these hints and tips with a great new tip on how to resolve stunk pump issues. Simply attach a bicycle pump to the end of your wall out hose. Start pumping away, and very quickly you should notice that you have some bubbles forming inside your Grainfather. This means that your work is now done and your pump should now be unstuck. Of course, it doesn't just work with a bicycle pump. You can use all manner of different things, including things like compressed air. They'll all do the job. The next tip is relative to your counterflow chiller and taking good care of it. Every 3 to 4 brews, sanitize your counterflow chiller using Star San. A simple way of doing this would be to use a pump in a bucket and recirculate through it. The acid in the Star San will help remove any build-up within the counterflow chiller, so this is a very good practice. Tip number 3, put your Grainfather while you're brewing on a half pallet. Firstly, this will raise the Grainfather up a bit, which will mean that you'll be bending over less. Secondly, if you need to press the reset switch at the bottom, you'll have much easier access. Tip number 4. Now this relates to the ball and spring that are in the recirculation pipe. On a couple of occasions I've seen people advise others on Facebook groups to remove these. The advice has been given after people have had problems with sticking pumps. It's important to remember that these are in place as a health and safety measure. If you do remove them and you hit that pump button by mistake, you're going to have boiling hot wart going all over your ceiling and probably you also. So really, the best advice would be to clear out anything that's causing a problem and then replace the ball and spring. You know it makes sense. Next up is how to deal with a stuck sparge. You'll know that you have a stuck sparge when your sparge water simply refuses to flow any further. The first thing to do is to make sure that you have adequate water still within the grain. Remove the top grain plate and then start stirring from the bottom to the top and break up the grain as much as you can. Never let it run dry. So while you're doing this, you should be adding more water and allowing it to move through the grain. Then replace the top plate and continue sparging. Perhaps it's the fact that you're using a lot of wheat malt or rye, in which case using rice hulls will be a very good idea. If not, this problem is probably caused by having a way too fine grain crush. Every 4 or 5 brews, I'd recommend that you leave your cleaner in overnight in your Grainfather in about 7.5 to 10 litres of water. This will certainly blitz any of those stubborn pieces of build-up. My next tip is not actually specifically aimed at the Grainfather, but it certainly is very good practice for anyone who is brewing their own beer. Every beer that you brew, record the recipe. Record everything to do with the fermentation and the brew. Also at the end, take tasting notes and work out how it can be improved. This will be a good way to continue and further your brewing. Tip number 8. Always do a whirlpool after the end of every single brew. Do your whirlpool at 0 minutes and do this for about 5 minutes. It's also good then to let it settle for a further 5 minutes. This will further amalgamate your beer, and it will also make sure that all of the trub and hops are all in the centre of your Grainfather. Very handy. Your yeast is the most essential part of any brewing process, and as such you need to treat it like a king. Start using yeast nutrients in all of your brews and your yeast will thank you for it. This next tip relates to using sugars in brewing. In the main, this actually is directed mostly at candy sugar, which is sold in big crystal chunks. Instead of just adding this type of sugar directly to your Grainfather, I would recommend you get some boiling hot water and give it a good stir up so that it dissolves at least partially before it hits your system. Number 11, now we have scrape the bottom plate, and this is very important when using any brewing system, and it also applies to the Grainfather. Simply take your brewing spoon onto the middle bottom of the Grainfather and give it a good scrape along. I would suggest doing this for every half an hour of your boil, and maybe a bit more when you have a high protein grist. Number 12, grain crush. Those of you who have been with me for a long time while I've been doing these videos will know that this is a pet topic. And that's for good reason. It's very important to get your grain crush right because it will really have an impact on the rest of your brew if you don't. I've been monitoring the various Grainfather groups that you'll find on Facebook for a long time, and one thing that is fair to say is that there are various homebrew stores out there that certainly have not got the grain crush right, so don't assume that if you're having it crushed by such an establishment that it will be correct. This doesn't necessarily mean that they're a terrible homebrew store. After all, we're all human, and sometimes we don't check equipment quite as often as we should, and these things can happen. Symptoms of an incorrect grain crush are as follows. Low efficiency. One of the things that can cause a low efficiency is not having a grain crush that is fine enough. A stuck sparge. Most stuck sparges are caused by having too fine a grain crush. Excessive grain bits. This can be in your mash and also in your boil. This is also caused by having a too fine grain crush. I've put the gap that you're going to need if you crush your own grain on the screen here, which is basically credit card thickness. At number 13 we have pH adjustment. Now the importance of this will really be dictated by the quality of your water. If it's water that you're able to drink, then that's certainly a good start, but if you have a very high pH, then it may be a very good idea to start adjusting it down. The ideal level is 5.2. Now I'm not going to go into any great detail about this here, but what I will say is that this level only needs to be applied to your strike water, and this will not only benefit your fermentation, but it will also benefit your mash, and it actually can increase your efficiency. So this is certainly nothing to be ignored and something to be taken seriously. Last but certainly by no means least is the Grainfather recipe tools. This database of recipes is totally free to anybody, and it marries up perfectly with your new Grainfather Connect. There's a huge database of recipes here, and you can actually sync these direct to your smartphone app. You will certainly find that all of my recent brew video recipes are actually stored on here too for your convenience. Better yet, if you want to try your hand at actually designing your own recipes, then you're free to do so with this free web-based program. Try it out, it's really cool. So there you go, that's the end of this Grainfather Hints and Tips Collection Video 3. I suspect there will be a part 4 coming in the near future, so certainly look out for that. I do hope you found this video both useful and interesting. So if you did like this video, then please do go ahead and like it on YouTube. This really helps me out and allows the videos to be seen by a wider audience on YouTube. I've got a lot of videos in the pipeline for the future, so if you're interested in seeing what I've got coming up, then please subscribe for future content. If you have any questions on anything that I've covered in this video or in others, or anything to do with brewing in general, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. I'm more than happy to help. Until then, happy brewing!